The Aseptic Room. Once with Ingeborg, we talked about old age. She smiled at that word, but that word was accompanied neither by the heart nor by a real smile. I imagined a longevity without death, a house in the country, a wall. I described to her the external architecture, and I bound her with a rope. And a garden within the walls, and again I said to her, the two of us. I was terribly convinced, a headstrong conviction about what doesn't come true. We imagined visits, guests, and discussed the names of the guests, drinking gin and tonics. As she sat on the blonde wood Biedermeier couch, its striped upholstery, the round Biedermeier table, and the vase of flowers seemed to be listening. Yet I wasn't altogether convinced by her participation. She was kind and somewhat distracted. Wouldn't you like us to live together when we are old? I'd insist. Then Ingeborg, I think to mollify me, would nod. But she did so as though she did not foresee a future. I did not speak of old age as a future, rather as a premonition, a fear. Old age, she said, is horrible. It's all horrible, I'd tell her, with a kind of glee. I tried to convince her that it's all truly horrible. At that time our lives weren't bad at all, and I meant it. Then our eyes radiated happiness, and years went by, swift. Every day I went to St. Eugenio, the burn unit. Twice I entered a room that had to be kept aseptic. That is the full reading of The Aseptic Room from Fleur Jaeggy's I'm the Brother of XX. This is translated by Jeannie Al-Hadef. And this is the edition from And Other Stories, published in 2017, with the original book originally written in Italian, Sono il fratello di XX, or Vigenti, Sono il fratello di Vigenti, written in 2014, published in 2014. So previously I have reviewed Fleur Jaeggy's Sweet Days of Discipline. And so this is actually the fourth of Jaeggy's works that I've read. It's very recent work in a way. She doesn't seem to write all that much. She is, as per her translator, quoted from her translator, a monumental loner, someone who clearly has a intuitive and borderline sacred ontological relationship with loneliness, fragility, solitude. And this is a book of about 21 stories, if you can consider them to be stories, that each center, or at least relate thematically, to families gone awry, abuse, loneliness, sort of dark piety, a dark sacredness, a melancholy, sleep, the problems of ambition and success against this limitrophy of the void that Jaeggy is always tiptoeing around and in dialogue with. And all in all, a numbness is present in this work. Equally within the book are scenes of outrage, abuse, sadism, violence, things that one might consider to be gross, untoward, downright macabre at points in a certain sense. Not necessarily in content, but in abstraction. And one of those I will get to later on when I read a passage from The Visitor. But I want to begin this review. Jaeggy is extremely difficult to review. This book more so than Sweet Days of Discipline. Where in Sweet Days of Discipline we had the plot, it's something to follow, something to hold on to, even if time was estranged and the delicateness was, held like it's going to break at any second. In this case, we have on average these stories, these snippets of life, these vignettes are 6 pages, and that's on average. Many are 1.5 pages. They're short. They allow you entry in a certain stylistic and aesthetic immediacy into a slice of something, a section of pure melancholy. There's a purity here. But what interests me is a form of Jaeggian mysticism, which is not necessarily Bataillean. It's not emphatically in relation to simply the void. There is some form of sacred here. Jaeggy's relationship with the sacred is directly with silence, solitude, and quiet. There's nothing noisy here. If anything was, it would get thrown out. It wouldn't fit. But there's not just aesthetically, not in the sense of just sound or brash tastes. There's nothing noisy in a human sense. There isn't a psychologizing in a usual sense. There is definitely not, and this is extremely important amidst all these stories that could easily revolve around that in their seeming simplicity and revolving around sleep and melancholy and numbness, could fall into the trap of pity, of something way too human, but especially pity. There isn't an ounce of pity in this book. That's not to say it's harsh or uncaring. What this book is akin to as an aesthetic experience for anyone who has listened to my talk with Julia Rescher on negative psychoanalysis, this is a book that is a paradox because it's a positive negative. It is the negativity, the Vanta Black negativity of a cold void made positive, made affirmative in the same way that one might frolic through a field of beautiful towering flowers and find beauty in that experience. Jaeggy has the distinct ability as a stylist to draw out from moments of frost and snow and ice and coldness and quiet and deathly silence a distinct Jaeggian beauty that is almost indescribable. I may sound at various points in this review a little bit hyperbolic. Now, this is from a new review in an interview in the New Yorker that is mentioned also in other Jaeggy reviews that you'll find on YouTube, because Jaeggy doesn't give many interviews. She's as per her translator, once again a monumental loner. Now, but there's a couple of sections from this interview that interest me going forward in this review. So this is Jaeggy to begin, and then the interviewer. But for me, it's very difficult to respond because I like silence so much. Perhaps that's why you prefer the mystics, who barely speak. Yes, I read them with great pleasure. They're metaphysical, intelligent, more than us. We write novels, but they have better-made brains with a sense of the metaphysical. But I have the impression that you're more interested in German mysticism than in German metaphysics or classical German philosophy. Oh, philosophy is fine. Less so than mysticism? The mystics are funnier. Do you see yourself as something as a mystic? I would like that. You aspire to it? Yes, basically. And so, I think this is how one should go to enter into Jaeggy's work, appreciate Jaeggy's work, is an apophatic literature that has to write itself, that can't exactly describe the God or the sacred that it's going towards, but it equally isn't Bataillean. So what I mean by that, in the sense of apathetic theology, many of you will have heard me talk about this many times on the podcast. Apathetic theology, in trying to get close to God, one understands that anything that enters into the senses or knowledge, by definition, cannot be God because it can be understood. And so you're continually in this process of refinement towards a negative theology. And so I feel that Jaeggy's, and what it is to be Jaeggian, is the paradox of an apophatic literature. It is a literature that, in the sense that any word it puts down is going to be, as per Beckett's infamous quotes, every word is a stain on silence. Jaeggy is completely in that camp of the paradox of having to write when what one is writing about is that which can never truly be intruded upon without ruining. Silence, quiet, solitude, a strange dark bliss. And so we have to appreciate her as a mystic, I think, as a mystical writer. But this changes when we read from the visitor in relation to something darker, something stranger, but something still deeply sincere. The visitor. She was born in 1248, a landowner and loaded with possessions. She marries at the age of 20, feels solace at the death of her husband and children. As she tore her clothes off, she pledged herself to chastity before the crucifix. She chose the way of mendicancy. Deprived of earthly loves, of goods, and of her very self, she embarked on her mystical contest with God. Unknown love and nothingness. A humble and frightened monk transcribes her words, her theological investigations, the visions. On Holy Saturday, she, the faithful Christian, tells him, led to it by an excess of the mind, that she had been in the sepulchre with Christ. She said that she had kissed the torso of Christ. She saw him stretched out, his eyes closed. Then she had kissed his mouth. Christ drew her to him. She spoke of a certain taste of the host that spread in her mouth, and when it descends into her body, it gives her a greatly pleasant sensation. She trembles violently. Years later, the bigot Agnes Blanbekin on the 1st of January again and again turns in her mouth, tender as egg skin and very sweet, Christ's foreskin. There are moments like this, and the language of this story in particular, this happens many times, where a gloss now of the continuation of this tale, the visitor, we have words Venus, fresco, nymph, seaweed, submerged. There is to compare her to maybe one other, but I will say soon about the unique nature of Jaeggy's writing, there is a Lynchian feel to the language. Something is not right, but there is being born a relationship with that not rightness. As close as I can get to describing it in the terms that I know it is, for those that have read the philosophy of Emmanuel Levinas, the notion of the there is, the il y a, this positive relationship with the trembling of ontology itself as a apprehension of being, of a voidness, of a limitrophy of nothingness that is right there. But it never goes so far as to be, say, Lovecraftian or weird in the sense of weird fiction. This is rooted within a complete sincerity of what is being written. Now, Jaeggy, as I mentioned, the uniqueness. Jaeggy, there is a category of author where one would say there is nothing else quite like them. Jaeggy is absolutely within that category. There is nothing else like Jaeggy. I have Anna Kavan's Ice on my bedside table at the moment. That stylistically is a little bit close, but there is something else in Jaeggy that just makes her something completely other. Equally alongside this, I have never known, and this is where the hyperbole comes in, I have never known another single writer to be able to establish you, the reader, within their stylistic, aesthetic experience so immediately. It takes Jaeggy a matter of words, 1, 2, 3 sentences, and you are embedded, you are deeply rooted in this frosty Jaeggian landscape that she has sculpted so finely in a matter of aesthetic compression. The Jaeggian approach is one of compression, as many other reviews have said. It is to compress the most amount of data into the least amount of words, but not in some taxonomical or encyclopedic or systematic sense. A sense of intuition, a sense of pure, excessive feeling. And this is where some form of vulnerability comes in. That one feels they've intruded upon something. Let me give you another reading, and then I will mention what I mean by that. This is from The Perfect Choice. The pain her son had caused her by choosing to die on a day in spring was less than she had expected. He is happy now, she said, and she herself felt almost relieved. She would have liked to die that way, or she might have chosen a different method. But which? Pain let itself be pushed about like a paper kite. She, the mother, after having pondered the various ways of dying, was in absolute agreement with her only son on the perfect choice. It couldn't have been otherwise. She shut her eyes in order to see the scene. She knew the place by heart. Meanwhile, she thought that she would have to change her will. The son had let himself fall off a rock on the glorious Via Mala, where as a child they had taken him to see the gorges. Yor looked unhappily at the water down below, lizard green deep down. The mother dragged him way up, so as to have him look below, to force him to look down. His step faltered. He was sickly, wan. And this did not please the mother, who held him by the hand. The boy looked at the emerald ring, the same colour as the water, beyond the limits of the visible. And today, years later, he went down. No one forced him. Of his own will, his will pushed him to the end, almost as though to recover his eyes as they'd been back then, that had settled with hatred on the pools of water. He hardly realized that he was going down, falling. The green water rocking him, and the sharp edges of the rocks had already torn him apart. Fossil lances. He left the bicycle padlocked, out of habit. He had been advised to ride a bike to attempt to calm his insomnia. You must tire yourself out. You must tire yourself out a great deal. With some physical exercise, the insomnia lessened. At the same time, tiredness increased. The doctor is pleased, and the mother who had got him used to sleeping pills, too. They were a dynasty of insomniac women. The men were more given to sleep. They had always slept, the mother said on a sour note. Why, then, could her son not sleep? The tiredness had to be increased so that the insomnia could decrease. The only son had become so tired that he no longer cared about the insomnia. He didn't even notice. He stayed up all night. It seemed to him that he had a great deal to do in the doing of nothing. So 2 short pages. Not only do we have the content, the short plot of a son's demise, his retrieval of a memory of childhood, his return. We also have an insight into a family. We also have a short meditation on sleep and nothingness. We also have a very short insight, as again, into Jaeggy's preference for a neutral gender balance. She's not interested at all in male or female. All fall within the void as humans for Jaeggy. But each of these stories, even in its content alone, on the surface is an intrusion into something where one shouldn't really be as a reader. But unlike, say, something like a diary, where many peoples have had their diaries published, and there's the question of ethics of intrusion there, this isn't an intrusion into content or events or secrets of a human kind. Not to say that this is alien or inhuman. This is an intrusion into some in-between space that's far too personal, that almost feels like it shouldn't have been put down at all. It's absolutely trembling at its core, and it's fragile and delicate, and any amount of brashness, or even talking about it too long, as I already am doing, begins to harm it. The stories themselves can be described: Osmosis, tale of a young girl watching calmly as her house burns down, or Adelaide, bond between a woman and a child against the outside world, or my personal favourite, The Black Lace Veil, which is just the discovery of a photo of the narrator's mother with the Pope that leads to a string of thoughts. That was the strongest story for me in the collection. But what it is with Jaeggy is something entirely unmatched, to be quite honest. She is a master, a sparse, terse master. Minimal, pure, and most emphatically, immediate. You can't escape it. You can't really lean back away from it. 2-3 sentences and you're drawn in. You could be in the busiest cafe. You could be on a 42 Celsius beach surrounded by people chatting about asinine nonsense. But you could pick up a Fleur Jaeggy book 2-3 lines later and you are transported to some Arctic void dwelling somewhere, trying to deal with someone who has somehow revealed a paradox of literature, a paradox of how have you revealed loneliness, how all of these themes that and aesthetics that Jaeggy is in dialogue with are at their core a problem of emptiness. Piety is a form of emptiness. The faith Faith in itself is a yearning where there is often nothing. A loneliness is a nothingness of community. Coldness generally is understood as that melancholy. Jaeggy's time doesn't really have any linearity. She is consistently and with a strange courage allowing herself to write of and with a nothingness. But it's not a nothingness that is quickly drawn into a nihilism of direction, of a look how meaningless this is. She remains with the nothingness without trying to moralize it. She sits with it, and you have to sit with it. And any attempt, much like I said about pity, you could easily apply pity to so many of these stories if you wanted to ruin them. It doesn't work. You get to sit with it, and you have to experience it. And it is an experience. One more excerpt, and then I will finish up, because I can't say too much more. This is from Agnes, which many people rate as a very highly rated story in this collection. Agnes left me 5 years ago. Today is Good Friday. I went to the church and looked at the vestments. The one day of the year when I go to church, I stare at the vestments and hope that they'll enter my eyes, covering them. On Good Friday, it's as if I am possessed. I know that the vestments last more than a day, but as far as I'm concerned, they last a day. I don't know what they may be hiding, those magnificent, exhilarating purple vestments. I have no precise understanding of the Passion. I mean to say that I have no knowledge of the liturgy. The crucifixion is to me without a body, without a soul, without an image. I know what nails and a crown of thorns are, ornaments as if in a dowry. But all of that means nothing to me. I'd just like to lie down next to it all and drink the blood. Yet on that day I become, by grace, by total ignorance, devout, like the pagans. I collect myself. I am in union with what is hidden. If it's a matter of love, I do not love. Other than that moment when I stand, kneel, and if no one is watching, bow down to the ground, my forehead touching the marble. And so, a single sentence there. I am in union with what is hidden. And if the reader can't particularly deal with what is hidden, they're probably not going to get anything out of this. Not to the extent I feel I have. But if you can allow yourself to be with the hidden, allow yourself to be with something that's, most of the time, deeply uncomfortable in its honesty beyond honesty. Not an honesty, once again, of content. Content isn't Jaeggy's bag. It's not an honesty of someone admitting to a secret or admitting to a familial issue, as many of these stories could, or a lack of faith, or a fear. It is an honesty of the feeling behind those things itself, the vulnerability and the fragility of being. Jaeggy is an ontological writer, and the sacred that she reveals is at times far too personal. It's really like I shouldn't be reading it at all, as if it's a mistake it's been published because it's just far too personal. And I think that's all I would really say about it. It is exquisite. She is undoubtedly a master of her craft. And start with Sweet Days of Discipline. Well, there's a bit more to hold on to there. But I am the brother of XX. It's just exemplary. And if you want something that truly is like nothing else, pick up this book, pick up a Jaeggy. She greatly deserves, a wider appreciation. But I doubt that will ever come, because it is such that I don't think a wide appreciation would foul it in some way. Not that I want to keep it all secret, but there's something there that doesn't lend itself to popularity or noise or the brashness that would come with that. And so maybe it is that her writing will always have to be as her writing is. Fragile, delicate, like glass. But with this strange, sacred violence behind the scenes that doesn't allow any of it to fall down into a wet mess. It holds itself up with a courage, and it's just absolutely fantastic. Those are my thoughts of Fleur Jaeggy's I'm the Brother of XX. Thanks for listening.